Hello everyone, welcome to the course Disability Studies in India Historical, Social and Cultural Perspectives, right. So, this is the module where we are talking about social policies, education and disability, and in this lecture I am going to, it is a very simple lecture basically, because I will be just talking about challenges in implementations, right. What I have been doing in the previous lectures. In the previous lecture, I have been discussing that what are the areas, thrust areas, core areas where one has to work on disability, right, where one has to work so that people with disability can be included. Just to reserve your memory, education was one of the important, empowerment, right. Through education you can empower the people, employment, health, and then we had a social securities. After discussing these four, we discussed that how after the independence people were aware about the concern and they started talking about it, but not before 1980s. There is no major movement, no major discussion that we can see before 1980s on people with disabilities, which means to say that their condition was extremely pathetic before 1980s. It does not mean anywhere that after the 1980s their condition had become so good. The only thing that I want to let you know is because at least people are trying, at least social policies are being framed, at least people are working in those areas so that they can be included, so that inclusive space can be created. All right. We also discussed that how the numbers of disability increased from 7 to 21. So, initially we had just 7 forms of 7 types of disability. Now, we have a 21 types of disability, and slowly you will see that number has increased more than what we have now. You got it? So, I also ask you to look at how people define disability, because that is one of the major tasks, how people define disability, because that is all will tend, like this is all will lead the way how we have thought of, how we are creating policies for our future generations. Second problem that we have, whether we have enough awareness program, right. We discussed this. So, what I am going to do in this lecture, I am going to pick up one by one and talk in details about the nuances it has. I might have discussed this, but nuances I did not discuss. So, in this lecture I am going to talk about the nuances, small petty nuances which are often ignored, which are not often noticed, which people tend to forget about it. All right. So, let us look at the slide number 1, and the slide number 1 I am talking about, despite the progressive legislation, right, despite the progressive legislation, challenges remain in effective implementation of disability policies in India. The main barrier include. So, here the problem is that there are legislation, right, there are legislation. It is like we discussed, right to Education Act, let us say, let me like Right to Education Act, which RTE, which says that free and compulsory education for all, right. This is what Right to Education Act is, which says that free education and compulsory education for all, but still we see that it has not been implemented properly because of certain problem which we could not take note of, as I discussed, that Indian economy is mainly agricultural economy. Here the families are different and complex. Communities are complex. There are different ways through which people think about it. There are many states which have different languages. India is a very, very diverse country where officially we have many languages and dialects. You are getting my point what I am suggesting, right? So, these languages and these dialects are spoken, people have a different food habits, people have a different customary habits. So, how are we going to bring one policy which can one size fits for all? It is not possible. So, we have to take note of it, that since the India is a diverse country, we have to look at the complexity which addresses the diversity of India, right. Until and unless we do so, it is not possible that they can be included. That is a one concern. Second concern that we have is that you see there are legislation. There are legislation on paper, people are talking about it, but it is not implemented. Legislation, there are legislation, but it is not being implemented properly. Still people are deprived, still people are not included properly, they are not able to access the facilities available to them. What are the reasons? Let us talk one by one and discuss this, alright. So, this is the context I have set up in which our lecture is, our discussion is going to be, today's discussion is going to be that part. Alright, so let us look at the slide number 1. In the slide I am talking about 3 problems that we have when it comes to implementation of progressive legislation. Right? What are those challenges that remain when we are implementing that? Right? What are the challenges that remain in the effective implementations? Why is it so that we have not taken care of it? We will talk about it. First, let us see what are the challenges. One, lack of awareness. Public understanding of disability rights is limited. Public understanding of disability rights is limited, leading to poor enforcement of laws and continued stigmatization of PWDs. I will talk one by one. That is a one problem. And that is a huge problem. It is not just a small problem. Inadequate infrastructure. Accessibility in public infrastructure remains a significant issue, especially in rural areas where basic facilities for people with disabilities are often lacking. And then we have limited data and research. There is a lack of up-to-date and comprehensive data on PWDs, which means people with disabilities in India, which hinders policy development and resource allocation. Let me talk about the first one, that is about lack of awareness. It has multiple meaning. Awareness does not simply mean making door-to-door campaign and letting the people know that we have this, we have that. How would they know the nuances of it, right? How many of us are aware that what are the government schemes are available for people with disabilities? That is a one problem, right? People do not know the schemes which are available for people with disabilities. That is a one problem. Second, even if they get to know where to go, which people will help them, what are the agencies, right? Whether they go to the post office or whether they should go to the bank or they should go to some other government machineries. This is proper lack. And third, which I personally feel, system is not efficiently working. Even if they go there, there are a lot of documents is required, like lot of documents. So, whether if they are illiterate people, they will not understand from where do they get this kind of documents. And then people will say you go to this place, you go to Tehsildar, you go to Lekhpal, you go to this place, you go to Pradhan, so on and so forth. And then when you go over there, then again there is another set. So here you see that a person has to get up in the morning and run, and still he will feel dissatisfied in the end of the evening. What will he do? Will be able to access that. What are we doing for this? I can tell you, I personally have met more than so far 80 people who are disabled, and I am just talking about the experience, what they have felt. I am just articulating those experiences with you. It's because they say that since we don't know first where to go, then second we don't have enough resources, because when you go to this place and you come, it's not like all the places are situated near your house. You have to spend money. So let's say, for example, if they get 500 in a month, right? To get a 500 in a month, first they have to spend 5,000. And obviously, I'm not going to talk about the lack of sincere approach of the people. They are also not sensitive towards that. They are suffering, they are coming every day, they have a problem, transportation's problem, they are leaving the work, which is their livelihood, right? If a family member go away, who will take care of the families then? From where, like everyone is not set up in the formal education set up, like the formally they are employed, where they can avail some leaps and they can work on it, they can fight for it. Our scheme is for everyone, every Indians available on the earth. Why are we leaving them anyone out? Why are we just thinking about, no, they can do this? We have to take their condition into the account, their complexities, these complexities, disability complexities taken into the account. So lack of awareness, and then obviously leading to stigmatization, right? Every day they are going, they are being stared, they are being gazed, they are being discriminated, they are not able to articulate their concern because people are not ready to listen. So you have to work on multiple levels when I am saying lack of awareness. Lack of awareness, not simply telling them you can have this or you can have that. This is the policies available, you can enjoy this. No, it goes much beyond what I am talking about, right? So this is lack of awareness, and then we obviously have inadequate infrastructure, right? We have a progressive legislation which says that ensure this, ensure that, let people have a proper education, let people have a proper employment, let people do this, and everything is there on the paper. But is it in the practice? Think about it. You go to any bank and see whether the bank are accessible for people with disabilities. There should be a separate desk for people with disabilities, because there is a huge crowd always in the bank, and how will they fight for it? Are people sensitive enough? No, they are busy with their own work, right? So how sensitive good first? This is what I am talking about, inadequate infrastructure. When I am saying inadequate, I do not always mean physical, I also mean social, I mean political, I mean cultural, I mean emotional infrastructure. They are needed, right? And obviously limited data and research, which I explained further, which I am going to again to tell you this. Limited data aggravate the problem. It aggravates the problem, because since there is a lack of a data, right? Since there is a lack of a data, you don't know how to work on this. So we have to bring a new team, and that new team will be working on that new data, so that they can work, they can fit into those infrastructure, because the research done in this field, the research deployed in this field is not sufficient, right? It's not sufficient. The research indulged is not including the research done may have certain loopholes. So we need to revise our method as well. Methodology becomes one of the significant part. So for doing research, calculation of numbers of people with disabilities and all that, you cannot have the same methodology which you are deploying for others. You are getting my point? Because again, remember that ableist assumption is always there. So you have to fight against that as well. And then you see that I am going to deal with the different issues, and therefore it is a complex, it is not simple. So we need different way to address that. So this is why there will be always lack of data and research until and unless we revisit those research first and how the process of collecting those data. All right, let's look at the next slide, please. In the next slide, I am talking about educational and employment gaps. This is a second. Although reservation exists, PWDs still face difficulties in accessing a quality education and securing employment, largely due to social biases and limited vocational training opportunities. There are reservations, right? But people with disabilities still face a problem in accessing quality education. And they have also problem in securing employment because of these biases, right? In fact, I can tell you there are many institutions where the seats are not properly filled, 5%. And the tragedy is that they do not get enough seats, enough candidates to fill that up. Since I am in a higher education, I can tell you personally that they are, when there is a vacancies for people with disabilities, we do not get enough numbers. So sometimes seats are left vacant, sometimes it is converted. However, now it is difficult to convert. It is not easy to convert the seats from any caste seats or any seats allocated to the caste or any seats allocated to people with disabilities. But I can tell you, since I am in higher education, because I am teaching in Banaras Hindu University, one of the obviously prime institutes. So when I can sense it from BHU, imagine what is happening in other parts of the countries. Imagine what is happening in other colleges of UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Bengal, name any states. It is everywhere. It is not that biases and prejudices are only limited to one state. No, it is everywhere. Why is it so? Why we are not getting enough candidates who can apply for the seats? All right. Look at the next slide, please. So the next slide I am talking about India's disability policies. It needs to evolve further to address the remaining gaps. It's a key steps towards a more inclusive societies that include, right? Look at this. It needs to evolve further to address the remaining gap. And what are the key steps? More inclusive societies include enhanced awareness and sensitization. Public awareness campaign should focus on reducing stigma and promoting inclusivity, with education about PWD rights starting from the school level. So this is all talking about awareness and sensitization. So public awareness campaign should focus on reducing stigma and promoting inclusivity. A strengthened monitoring mechanism, that's a very important. That's a very significant, as I was talking about it, that how people are not taking this into the account. People do not see whether it is implemented properly or not. So the implementation of disability laws should be regularly monitored through a comprehensive framework that ensures accountability at all levels of government. Right? This implementation of disability laws should be regularly monitored through a comprehensive framework that ensures accountability. Like people should be accountable whether they are implementing this or they are not implementing this. Investment in accessible infrastructure. Accessibility is a fundamental right, and greater investment in infrastructure and technology is crucial for PWD's participation in societies. This includes adapting workplaces and school to be PWD friendly. All right. So, important is not providing accessible infrastructure, but it also whether these people and these infrastructure are friendly. You got this idea? So, training program that equipped PWD with industry relevant skills, support employment beyond the reservation systems can open doors to independent livings. Again, when I am saying independent, I just think they can earn livelihood with their own, not choices, but obviously I am more with interdependence, right. So, I mean independent living in other sense, not in that sense that you do not think about others. Many schools, especially in rural areas, lack the necessary infrastructure such as ramps, accessible restrooms. You can look at in your places as well, and most importantly specialized classroom resources, right. For example, students with sensory impairments resources such as braille materials, hearing aids and speech to text tools or speech to text tools, they are often unavailable. You are getting my point. So, there is a braille, there should be also hearing aids and speech to text. So, there should be separate room for them, because obviously they need to access properly this education system, and if you do not have enough room, just providing the, I mean that is what I say, like a lot of people claim they have accessible infrastructure, right, and infrastructure is disabled friendly. No, my dear friends, friendly infrastructure simply means that you should have first people can access it and they will not feel discriminated, people are sensitive towards them and they are allowing them to get the proper education as they want. They can move freely, they can talk freely, they can access everything freely. That is important. We should ensure that first, right. So, then only we can talk about that it is a disabled friendly classrooms or disabled friendly school that we have. So, we need to avail this, we need to make these facilities available for my students and friends, right. This is an important concern that we have when we are talking about implementations, all right. So, buses should be accessible, restrooms, right. Do we have restrooms? Do we have people who can help people with disabilities, right. So, now you will say this extra burden and that is why people do not do that, people are like coming in less numbers. So, you do not think on this thing, this is not done, right. This is not acceptable. We should have a proper facilities, we should employ people who can take care of in certain needs of people with disabilities. Then only you can say that infrastructure that you have is disabled friendly. You must make investment in accessible infrastructure. Does not always mean buildings and ramps and all that, right. As I discussed that it has to go many more steps further, otherwise depriving them from the rights is injustice. Despite there is a legislation available, despite that there are mandates for the rights of people with disabilities, but no, it will not be effective anymore, all right. Let us look at the slide please. So, teacher training and sensitizations. So, teacher play a very crucial role in inclusive education and few receives adequate training on how to teach children with disabilities. Lack of awareness, sensitivity among teachers can lead to alienation, neglect, bullying of a student with disabilities, right? Then we have a social stigma and attitudinal barrier, right? One has to think about this, that it should not be there. That's very humiliating. Cultural attitudes and misconception about disability that persist in Indian society. So many families fear social stigma and choose to keep their children with disability at home rather than send them to school, believing that they may face discrimination or harassment. Right? That's an important concern. Then we have a financial constraint and limited resources. Implementing inclusive education requires investment in facilities, assistive technologies, specialized staff. In a country where educational funding is often limited, such investments are hard to come by. Government funding alone is insufficient. Private schools are often reluctant to invest in infrastructure for inclusive education, right? So, having said this, right, making this point quite clear, let me conclude the slide first. Right. India has undoubtedly made remarkable progress in recent years in creating an inclusive environment for people with disabilities, which are guided by international frameworks and national legislation like the RPWD Act. However, achieving true inclusivity requires a sustained commitment. That's important. It's not like to us 1 day or 2 days or 3 days or weekly program, right? I have seen a lot of people doing weekly program on sensitization of people with disabilities. No, this is a sustained, that's a key word. That only can transform societal attitudes, that only can improve infrastructure, that can only ensure if you have a sustained commitment for equal opportunities for people with disabilities in all aspects of life. So, by implementing these policies with rigor and empathy, right, you need to also believe in this first. You should also believe in this first. Yes, they really need it. We need to be sensitive towards people with disabilities. Then only India can continue on a path toward a more equitable and inclusive societies, right. So, just to conclude my lecture, I would like to just say that we should have sustained commitment for inclusion of people with disabilities, transforming normative structures, making spaces inclusive for people with disabilities. Let's celebrate the diversity. Let's believe that there are people marked with differences. They are also have the same right as so-called normal people have. If we believe in this, if we think in this, then only we can have a better future for our generations. Thank you so much for listening to me. See you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.